All right.
All
Jacinta.
right. Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are so incredibly excited to be with you today. And this is a wonderful opportunity to help you gain some great insights and tips from some experts that have many decades of experience in building executive presence, confidence. So by the time you finish listening to our discussion today, you should have some tips on how women can develop an unforgettable executive presence. My name is Dr. Jacinta ElNaggar. I am the CEO and founder of Excite Excellence Incorporated. I currently am a certified executive coach, public speaker, and general dentist. And one of the reasons why I started my company is because as I was developing as a professional woman, I did not have a woman in my life to actually show me how to do this. So I want to help as many people as possible. And I'm really excited to have this wonderful discussion with Suzanne about this topic so that we can help you on your journey. So Suzanne, please introduce yourself.
I'm happy to do that. Hi, I'm Suzanne ElNaggar. I am CEO and founder of Vantage Shift, and I am also a certified professional coach. I have a really long history in a number of different industries, different companies, different roles. I am an ICF member, and I'm over 20 plus years in a variety of industries. I've actually been through some very solid leadership experience. I also have, besides my engineering degree and all the years in tech, I also have a communication degree. So I've really come at every single job I've had with sort of that dual perspective of, kind of the techie behind me, but also the communication expertise. I started Vantage Shift because I felt very strongly that coaching is a way for people to experience true transformation in whatever area of their life that they would like. And I'm very grateful to be here with you, Jacinta, and looking forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. And coaching it is so transformative, as you mentioned. I know just for a lot of the clients that I've worked with, I'm sure the clients that you work with, that there's so many things that coaching does for us, and not only as the coach, but also as the client as well.
Absolutely.
So when we think about executive presence, there's a lot of things that come to mind. And I believe we always hear this conversation or this statement come up, but it's really unique when we were having our conversation about having a collaboration to discuss this topic, to put a different spin on it and to put it from a perspective of being a woman in the workplace and showing how we can really make that presence unforgettable. So there's a couple questions that we came up with that are really at the top of mind when people are thinking about their executive presence. So our flow for today is to go over the questions so you know where we're going. And then we're going to talk about building confidence, nonverbal communication, and other things to help answer those questions so that you leave here empowered and gain some insights on our discussion. So the first two questions that I'll talk about, and then Suzanne's going to talk about a couple also. These are questions that people come up with. Now let us know if you've had these questions, if you've heard these questions before, or maybe you've thought about them before. So executive presence, is this a particular issue for women? And if so, why? So take a moment and let us know what you think about that. Is it an issue? Okay. Our next question is how women show up differently from men in business settings. Do you think this is an issue? Do you think this comes up? We've seen it in different settings, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So there's a couple other questions. So Suzanne, I'll let you go ahead and go over those two.
Yeah, some of the things that were top of mind for me lately, and I actually just wrote an article on Medium about implicit bias.
Okay.
There is a lot of implicit bias against women, and the funny thing is, it comes from others, but sometimes it comes from the women themselves, and we
Mhm.
can explore that as we go along. And then something else that I think is really important to touch on is what are some innate qualities that women can draw on to be really great communicators? So I think there are a lot. And so over the course of our discussion, I think some of those will come up.
All right. Very exciting. So we'll start off with our first question about is this particular issue an issue? And if so, why? And I would say, yes, this is absolutely an issue that comes up quite often as it relates to developing your executive presence. For many, many years, and Suzanne, you're welcome to chime in on this also, just women in general have always been kind of placed in an area where they're not supposed to really say too much. They're not supposed to project like they have authority, like they can be their true authentic selves. So like a lot of times women feel that there's just a certain way that they're supposed to act in the workplace. And oftentimes when those situations come up, women just don't say anything. They just kind of go with it. And particularly depending on what type of field you're in, your field may be more heavily dominated by men in your field than women. And so I do believe this is an issue, but a lot of times building up your confidence will help put you in a better place to where you feel empowered, that regardless of who is at the table, it could be a group of women, it could be men or women, or it could be in any other scenario, that you have what it takes inside of you internally to be able to really project your confidence. And confidence is multifactorial. I talk about this in one of my YouTube videos. There's a series I have that talks about just building on the definition of confidence. And in itself, confidence, it might be different to you and I. There's certain parts of it that are universal, how you speak, how you dress, how you talk, but there's certain parts of confidence that are very, very personal to you as an individual. And I've noticed that with a lot of my clients. Sometimes confidence could be linked to self-care. You wouldn't think that, but a lot of times it can. So what are your thoughts about that, Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely. Building confidence, I mean, we could probably talk about that for days alone. But, I think one of the things that came up when I was doing my research, as a matter of fact, for that article that I mentioned, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to know your value.
Mm-hmm.
And, so often, I think this is probably universal, maybe not just women, but we tend to focus on what we don't have instead of what we do
Mm-hmm.
have. But women especially often undervalue themselves. And they're often undervalued by the people around them. And if you undervalue yourself, then it can cause you to communicate in ways that don't say, I'm in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have that title, but what happens is the way you speak, the way you hold yourself, all of that stuff really doesn't communicate what you want it to, and that strength and that you really do have inside. And sadly, women are often judged very harshly by others, even
Mm-hmm.
other women. So it's really important to just remember that you're this collection of talents and ways of being that are really unique to you. And you bring that value every day when you use those talents.
And that is a great, great point, Suzanne. And bringing it every day is so critical. That consistency as you
Mhm.
are trying to establish your confidence in your executive presence is critically important, because I've seen it in so many scenarios, especially working as a C-suite, when you have someone who is confident, they show the confidence, they have the executive presence, but let it be one day where things just go bad. You just have a rough day, the sky is falling, there's a rainbow and there's no leprechaun at the end of it. It's just a bad day. And everything goes out the window. I mean, they go back to those old routines. They may not conduct themselves as confident as they like to be. They may second guess themselves, talk badly about themselves. And other people see that. And so when they see that happen, they think, oh, she was confident, but I see this just made her not feel the way that that she has been in the past. So that consistency is important. And as you mentioned too, positive self-talk is critically important. Instead of saying, I can't do this or I can't do that, I don't want to do this. Let's just change our mindset and say something a bit more positive. I can do this. I'm going to do this. Something along those lines.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring up positive self-talk because I do think for a lot of us, there's a talk track in our heads that
Hmm.
it's called different things. So I read a book that where one expert in psychology calls it a gremlin. And
Okay.
people call it different things. And there's another really well-known coach who calls it your inner critic. But essentially, whatever the name is that you give it, we all have that little voice in our head that's constantly trying to pull us into the negative. And it's
Hmm.
really, I mean, research has shown that human beings tend to focus more on negative. I mean,
Mm.
that's another topic we could probably talk about for hours in terms of like why that is and how social media kind of takes advantage of that, in their algorithms. But if you can get to a point where you can't really silence that voice, but you can minimize it and you can make it less important and you can replace it with a voice that actually is supportive. And
Hmm.
then instead of really giving voice to that inner critic, you're constantly like, you're actually listening to more of an inner coach, which I
Mm.
think is a much better place to be. And the interesting thing about that is as that shift happens inside of you mentally, the people around you will notice. And you project a lot more confidence and strength when that
Hmm.
inner, when that self-talk is much more in the mode of, okay, how do we move forward?
Exactly. And, one of the things that comes up a lot of times in a coaching setting, as we mentioned earlier, both of us are certified coaches, is the fact that self-awareness and just knowing that
Yeah.
this is the way that your mind thinks is so important, because being aware of it is really the first step to conquering it. And being able to switch your perspective and say, okay, I know that if this happens or this situation comes up, it's going to make me feel stressed out or feel like I can't do this. And just being able to switch it and think of the positive things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else that can really help with confidence building is I think that for women, we talked about them often feeling undervalued or that other people undervalue them, but women need to keep top of mind that so many of us, like, look at you. You have amazing education. You have amazing skills. You have amazing experience. Like, bring it. Keep that in mind. Like, that's one way for you to keep your confidence up is to just think about all of the stuff that you've been through and everything you've brought to this where you are today. And I think women, it's really important for us to keep in mind that many of us are highly educated. We have a lot of
Hmm.
learning, a lot of really amazing work experience, amazing life experience, so many skills that we've cultivated over time. And, those experience and skills, they didn't just get you where you are today, but they're going to propel you
Right.
forward into the future too.
Exactly, exactly. And I've noticed just with a lot of women that are high achievers as well, that we don't take that time to really celebrate our successes. And I think what you just
Yep.
mentioned is a great exercise for anyone to do.
Guilty.
Just grab me too, me too. I've done it also. And I say, take a moment to just grab a piece of paper and just write down some of those things that Suzanne just mentioned. What are the successes, your accomplishments, and just really reflect on that and just be excited for what you've done.
Absolutely.
All
Yeah. So
right.
what
So we
else do you
covered,
think women should do besides building confidence?
yes. So confidence is fundamentally important. That's important in
Yeah.
terms of knowing what confidence really means to that particular person. I think another aspect to consider when you are trying to build your executive presence outside of confidence is to really think about improving your communication skills. So
Mm,
when you are thinking about that executive, or an exercise I give to my clients is think about that the person that you admire or inspire to be like. What are some of those things that inspire you about that person? Is it the way they speak? Is it the way that they handle themselves in stressful situations? Whatever it is, kind of think about it and reflect that on yourself. So communication is a big portion of it. Most of the time, the clients I've worked with say, oh, I really like the way that she conducts herself or how she speaks. So improving your communication skills is a great way to start. One thing that I would recommend in this particular area is active listening. Actively listening is something that can help you know when you need to change your message or when you need to stop talking or when you need to say something. And a lot of times you can come in situations as that leader or executive, and you may have that mindset of, I just need to tell everybody this is what they have to do. And a lot of times that may not be the best course of action. You do have to be a leader, but listening is really important. So Suzanne, what are some thoughts that you have about just ways that some of our viewers can improve on their communication skills?
Yeah. I love that you bring up active listening because it is very important. And, as coaches, that's something that we are trained in and have to practice every day,
Mm-hmm.
and you're holding space for people. But I think one of the things that actually contributes to you being able to be an active listener is practicing empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about your experience, but I've talked to a lot of people who think they're empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And when they describe how they communicate, they think that they're being empathetic if they understand what the other person's saying. And it's actually a little bit different. There's a difference between understanding the words and thinking about like where the other person is coming from, what
Mm-hmm.
are their motivations, and what are the feelings that they're having. Because if you can understand that, then this actually helps you be more persuasive.
Yes.
You talked about earlier about how active listening can help you figure out if you should keep talking, stop talking, change your message. Absolutely. And practicing empathy can do that as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody wants to listen to somebody who just like rolls over them verbally. Like, you probably talked to these people and thought, oh, I have to get out of this conversation. I mean, they
Right.
want to listen to somebody who validates their thoughts and ideas. And women, fortunately, are often really skilled in this area. And we talked earlier
Mm-hmm.
about, like, what are some innate qualities that women sometimes have? We are actually socialized to live a bit more in our emotional selves, and we're socialized to be better listeners. So this is a great skill to cultivate, and it is not to be underestimated. Um, but one thing we need to avoid, though, is being empathetic does not mean that you then turn the conversation to be about yourself.
Yes.
So I remember an example of somebody in my life who described herself as highly empathetic. And she thought she was empathetic because anytime someone brought up a topic, she immediately thought of a story from her life. And so all the person had to
Mm.
say was like a sentence or two. And then immediately she was off to the races on her own story. Oh, that reminds me of. And the message that you're sending the person you're talking to when you do that is that you actually don't really care what they have to say. And so it's
That's
actually the
true.
opposite of empathy when you're like turning the conversation on yourself. So it's something that we need to be aware of, because I do tend to notice that a little bit more in women than in men. And we've
Mm-hmm.
somehow in our young, in the young stages of our lives, we were somehow taught that that's how to relate to people.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously in a conversation, you have that back and forth, and it's great to be able to relate to folks, but ensure that when you start telling your own story, that the person who is sharing has actually gotten proper validation from you first.
That is such a great point to bring up, Suzanne, because empathy, it is critically important. And I've had scenarios like that come up also where it does turn around to be, well, I had this and I did that. And I think, sometimes in those situations that genuinely this person really wants to help. Like they genuinely do want to give some insights or feel like they're have a seat at the table, so to speak. But oftentimes silence is really power. I mean, sometimes it is best just to say nothing. And that in itself will help you have a unforgettable presence. There's knowing that having that discernment to know when to talk, when not to talk is really important. And I've noticed just on my end in some of the roles I've had is that when you put yourself in a situation where you are actively listening and you don't really say too much, but you only speak when you really need to, people tend to listen to you a bit more because they say, oh, this person is speaking. We never hear them speak. I wonder what they have to say. So it's something to keep in mind also. Empathy is great and it's so important, but just being able to use it at the right time.
Yeah. And maybe we could coin a term for this, so strategic silence. But it's it's
Yes.
uh it's really key. And you are so right that when we think about the people we think of as like the best conversationalists or the best
Mhm.
listeners, they're usually the people who talk less. But when they
Yes,
do open their mouths, they've got something important to say.
that is true. So
Yeah,
true.
absolutely. Something else that comes to mind on this topic is clearing your own mind when you're talking with someone.
Mhm.
I know that for most of us, we're really worried about what we're going to say next. And so rather than hearing, like truly hearing the other person, we're hearing them say words and our mind is busy planning what's going to
Mhm.
come out of our mouths next. And honestly, it's to be a good communicator if you're not really listening to the other person, if your mind's kind of busy with your mental shopping list. So it's really important to just be present, and then you can respond like more appropriately. And sometimes you may actually even be surprised because
Mhm.
by clearing your mind, really listening, that person may give some input that actually shapes your ideas more fully or gives you a
Yeah.
different idea, and the two of you come together over an idea that's way better than what either one of you could have thought of alone.
Exactly. And that being present is so important. And I'd like to add another part of that too. When you're thinking about being present, is observing nonverbal communication. Because
Mm,
in order to really be fully present, clearing your mind, as Suzanne said, is so important to do. Like you have to turn your thoughts off or almost turn it down just a little bit so you can still have it in your head, but you still listen to somebody else in terms of what they're saying. But actually observing what people are doing is really important also because their body language will tell you what they want to say but are not wanting to actually say. And so I believe that that has a big role into that clearing your mind, putting things on pause and really just truly observing what is happening. One of the things that I do and I teach my clients to do too is when you have a conversation or there's a group discussion about whatever topic is, really take a moment and just look around the room, see what everybody's doing, because
yeah.
you will be able to tell, yeah, this person is on board, this person is mad, this person is somewhere else. I mean, you will be able to get a sense by their body language as to what they're doing. I've seen people look on their phone. I've seen people pop pen tops off. I've seen people grab the desk. Those are really expert tips that you might want to try to do and just you'll be surprised. You'll be really amazed about how much you can actually see if you just pay attention to nonverbal communication. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, just that whole topic uh, of owning the room,
Mhm.
it's so important. And yes, observing what people are doing. What's funny is we talked a little bit about strategic silence. I think that's going to
Mhm.
be like our thing now, like
Yes.
our new word.
Yes.
Um, but I found if I'm addressing a group and especially I had a speaking engagement that was right before lunch and the
Oh, wow.
conference was running late. And it was literally like I was between these people and their food. So you can imagine like the mood in the room, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
looking around and then being silent for a few seconds, and then
Hmm.
make a point and be silent for a few seconds. It's amazing how you can actually get people engaged again. Because when the voice keeps going, when they're hungry, they're thinking about other stuff. They have to go make that phone call because they've been waiting for lunch to contact their boss or their client or whatever. Um, their mind just hears wah 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 if you keep
Right.
talking. In the silence, it helps them like a switch kind of flips. And then they come
Hmm.
back to you like, oh, what are they doing? Stop talking. What's going on?
Hmm.
So you can actually draw people back in through that strategic silence.
Yes, and I think a lot of people have been in conferences and situations like that where they run over. And I'm sure you've experienced it. I know I have too. People are used to people rushing. I gotta fly through these slides. I need to rush through these slides. I need to hurry up. And so you bring up an excellent point, because if you take that moment just to pause, it does draw attention to you, instead of just hearing someone talking and finding someone else something else to do with your mind in the meanwhile they are speaking. So that's a really great fantastic point. And another thing I'd like to add to that is, in terms of a strategy, because being able to pause, it's not as easy as Suzanne and I are saying, just to stop talking, stop thinking, and only look. It's not that easy. It's not. And it takes some practice to do that. And so, one of the things that I would recommend or just encourage you to maybe try to do, if this is something that you're just trying to maybe, well, how can I pause? How can I really do that strategic pause, what we've discussed, is to just practice in your everyday interactions. The first time you do it, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel really, really weird and bizarre. But believe it or not, the world is still going around. Time is still moving. It just feels like it stopped for a second. So just take a few moments out of your day, regardless of the interaction, to just practice.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yes, you're right. Practice makes perfect.
Yes. Yes, it does. So I know we had another question that came up to mind, and this one is how women show up differently from men in business settings. And so
Mm-hmm.
we kind of touched on this briefly, and it really does go back to how our upbringing is. I know for me personally, I didn't have a really strong woman in my life to kind of guide me on the professional side of things, like how do you conduct yourself as a professional. So I had to kind of learn along the ways. And I believe that a lot of women feel kind of the same way. It just depends on your upbringing. And so I think having that awareness that there is some differences, women do show up a little bit differently. I've seen it in situations kind of in two ways. Either the woman can come across as the aggressor and it's just like extra, like because she feels like she has to project that to match up with whoever that she's communicating with in a business setting as it relates to men. Or I've seen the opposite, where they just don't say anything and they just sit quietly and just kind of listen, nod their head, okay, and just keep going with it. But really, our goal here between Suzanne and I is to help you develop an unforgettable executive presence. So if you can find that balance in between being the person who is going to speak with authority and the person that knows when they need to pause and just listen, that helps you develop an unforgettable executive presence. What are some thoughts that you have, Susan? Suzanne, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, thinking about, when you said like how we're socialized and brought up,
Mhm.
um, there's so much about, like, I think about how I was socialized as a child, and women were supposed to be like a smaller presence.
Mhm.
It was just the culture that my parents came from, and they certainly weren't trying to damage my self-esteem or anything, but it was just like it's just their culture and how they related to the different genders, right? And
Yeah.
so when you think about how women communicate non-verbally, like what you were just saying about how they sit quietly and just maybe nod their heads, listen intently, It's amazing too how women continue to get validation for that sort of behavior throughout
Mm.
their lives.
Well. Mhm.
I I personally have seen it like over 20 years and working at different companies, how many women who were the ones nodding their heads in the room and smiling were
Yeah.
like the most highly valued. And it doesn't mean they weren't smart or that they didn't have great ideas, but it was just a certain behavior that got really rewarded. But what's interesting is I think the physical presence, it might get you that, like, if you're sitting quiet and nodding, you might get one sponsor who really likes that and gives you like a one set level promotion or something. But if you really want to get to the C-suite, or you really want to you're in the suite and you really want to make a true impact, uh, your physical presence is huge. Um,
Yes.
so I got a tip from a personal trainer several years ago.
Okay.
This was so shocking to me. And I have to say, you have to practice this, and it doesn't always come off well because there are people who will still, to this day, it's the year 2023, and some people still don't want to accept that women can kind of be CEOs and can be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he gave me a couple of tips when I'm standing up. I'm short. And I have to say, I'm the person who, when I go in the conference room, I have this battle in my head of, do I leave the seat up with my feet dangling so that I'm sitting at the same level as everybody else at the conference room table? Or do I scoot my
Mm-hmm.
seat back and, settle it down so that my feet touch the ground? And then I hope nobody notices like that I'm small and my head's just like popping up against the table. So when I'm standing, it's even worse. And so one of the things he taught me was two things. Oftentimes women will stand kind of with, that arms akimbo position, but women will often stand with their fingers kind of cradling their lower back, almost
Mm-hmm.
like, if you imagine you have a backache.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the hands are like really high up on their waist. And he said, you know what? Stick those hands right on your hips, fingers forward.
Mm.
And if you try it, it actually puts your arms in a really strong position. Your shoulders
Mm.
align and your whole posture it's transformative. And then the other thing you do with your feet is, rather than plant them, women are taught, of course, to take smaller steps and keep their feet close together, whatever. No, you plant your feet shoulder width apart. That is an
Mm.
amazing power pose. And if you do that a few times, it actually starts to affect your tone of voice, the
Yes.
volume at which you speak, all of that stuff, and just how you like show up in a room.
Yes. Yes. Wow. I really appreciate you sharing what you've learned from the trainer. That is some really great insights in terms of how to really project that executive presence. And I hope that everyone sees that it's a pretty in-depth topic. It is. There's so many things that go into it. And that's a great, absolutely fantastic technique to do to help you with your executive presence. I know one thing that's helped me also is when I go into a room and if I am saying good morning or whatever, I purposely, before I walk in or I'm walking down the hall, I purposely just sit up straight. Kind of what you're talking about, how your posture is really important in a situation like that.
Mhm.
I sit up straight, I walk in and I say good morning. But I don't say good morning like good morning, just inaudibly to myself, right? I don't say that. I personally take a deep breath and I say good morning. I mean, like good morning in a nice, polite way, but to the point where it's audibly heard by others so that they
Mhm.
know that you are here. And I think that helps to add
Mhm.
to your executive presence too, because a lot of times when you have meetings like that, and if it's in a situation where everyone's talking and it's not really a place for you to do it, then don't do it. But what I found that when people just kind of walk and just scurry in, they just, oh, such and such is here whenever they're having a conversation. But if you kind of say something to begin with, use that posture, kind of like what you mentioned before, and use the big voice that you have in a nice way, people are gonna look like, oh, good morning. But not don't, yeah,
Mhm.
of course. It still has to be polite, professional.
Yeah. And you know what you were doing? You were taking up some space. And
Exactly.
it's interesting. Women are often socialized to do the opposite, to not take up that space. And men are
Hmm.
encouraged to do it. Like you think about how little girls and little boys are socialized, right? The
Hmm.
girls are taught to like, oh, it's, you know, nice to sit down and be quiet. And the boys are like, oh, boys will be boys. They run around, they
Yeah.
yell, and everybody tolerates that, right? And if a girl
Right.
does it, then they're like, what's wrong with that girl?
Right.
No, there's nothing wrong with her. She's being a kid. Like,
Hmm.
and it's okay for women to use that big voice, to take up the space, to, you know, stand in a power pose, to say good morning in a reasonable voice and not be like, oh, worry about, am I disturbing people? No, say good morning.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. That's a really good point. I think we do we have been raised to think, oh, you don't want to bother people, you don't want to bother people. But sometimes it happens, and we're helping you to develop an unforgettable executive presence, not just an executive presence, one that people remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a couple questions that you had that came to mind. So do you want to get us started with your question, Suzanne?
Yeah. So, one of the things that, you know, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is that whole topic of implicit bias.
Hmm.
And you know, kind of how women can deal with um, the bias that they have inside of themselves, but also the bias that comes from the rest of the world. um, you know, our the way that we communicate is so important to get over this. I mean, this is, it's critical for women that we actually work on that implicit bias. It's also hugely difficult because so many people don't even realize they have those biases.
Right.
So I actually took a test. It was like a research project from one of the major universities, and I was in a management training class. And it was one of those tests that I found particularly irritating because they keep asking the same question but different ways, different
Hmm.
angles. The questions are, you know, the answers that you're supposed to pick from multiple choice are like sorted differently or whatever. But essentially, what it was supposed to get at is your underlying implicit biases, the biases that you don't even know you have. And it's really interesting how, like I mentioned, you know, in my research, that they say that women can even be biased against themselves or against other women. This isn't just a problem of like men being biased against women. um, I actually showed up with a slight bias towards thinking that women had more responsibility for things like children, the household, you know, because
Hmm.
questions about who cooks in your household, who, you know, takes the kids to the doctor, things like that. And it was amazing because here I was after all those years. I mean, I was director level at a very large company,
Hmm.
you know, at the time that I took that test. And you'd think that I, of all people, would have zero biases, but I actually did have a little bit of a bias. And I thought about where it came from and realized so much of it was from way back in
Mm.
how I was raised.
Yeah.
And so, you know, trying to overcome that and ensuring that I didn't project that onto other women became like a mission for me. And so
Hmm.
making sure that I didn't like, I wasn't judging if someone else showed up just the way we were talking about, taking up
Right.
space, using their big voice, like that that was okay. And that I not only thought it was okay, but applauded it.
Hmm.
And, you know, it's really important also, like what, not just the way we communicate, but what we're communicating as well, in terms of like how we view our own prospects for moving to different roles, for being promoted, for leading teams. Like we, all of that comes out of what we're communicating to the people around us.
That's a really great point. And that implicit bias is,
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like we just had a coaching session because it is something that we really have to think about. Like,
Yeah.
why do we think the way that we think?
Mhm.
sometimes. And that's really what coaching can do for anyone that's interested in really transforming their life, is to uncover those hidden obstacles or roadblocks that you just don't see that you have. And I just appreciate you for sharing that experience as a director in terms of what some of those implicit biases can mean and where they come from. One of the things that have I did personally when I was on my journey to become a better communicator, and I spent a lot of time with Toastmasters International and became a distinguished Toastmaster with them, is that recording yourself is a great way for you to see how you are communicating with others. It may sound a little bit weird. I think probably now it may not be as weird, just because we're using cell phones for everything and there's a lot of videos around. But if you want to get an idea as to, well, I wonder how people see me when I'm talking, take a few moments and record yourself. You'll be able to see those situations that come up, or maybe some of those gestures that you do. You may scratch your hair or twiddle your fingers. You'll be able to get an idea to see what other people are seeing when you speak to them, and then just try to adjust your message and get help to help you communicate better.
Oh, that's so interesting that you brought up about the like playing with your hair, or some people, like I was talking to someone the other day who was constantly playing with an earring. That is a very female thing to do. And interestingly, when you talk about wanting to get over those implicit biases, like
Mm-hmm.
that's one way that we actually are signaling that what we're saying is either difficult, it's difficult for us to communicate, or difficult for us to envision ourselves as
Mm-hmm.
communicating us from a position of strength. And those are sort of like security blankets, right, that we've
Mm-hmm.
developed. And so yes, it's absolutely really important that we recording yourself and seeing what you look like on camera, how your voice sounds, because that's another thing too, like none of us hear our own voice the way that others hear
Mm-hmm.
it, because it's in
That's
our own
true.
head. So very important that you hear your voice and you hear what your voice is communicating.
That's really a great point. And I know there's a video I did on YouTube that talks about body language and some of those secrets that come up with it. But that you mentioned about your earring, that is a really good one. And it's so interesting you mentioned that, because we talk about it and people do it all the time. And
Mhm.
on one end, when you're observing, like we talked about earlier, you can pick up on those things. If somebody's twirling their earring and talking to you, you may want to say, I wonder if this is right, or do they know what they're talking about? Because when I've noticed a lot of people are doing those type of nonverbal communications, there's something in their head that's like, mm-mm, 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 I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And even if you don't know what to do, just being mindful of your nonverbal communication. You don't have to show that you don't know what you're doing. Because as I mentioned, your body will say what you are not wanting to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Your body always gives you away.
Yes,
That's
it
a
does.
really good point.
It does.
Yeah,
It
it
does.
does.
So, what are some other thoughts that you had about implicit bias?
Um, it's such a huge topic. We could probably like do a separate session on it. But I think it's really important for women to keep this in mind
Hmm.
when they're in a professional situation, or a situation where they feel like they're going to be judged. Um, Unfortunately, it means that oftentimes women have to kind of live in their heads a little bit more to prep themselves for those sorts of situations. But it doesn't mean you can't overcome it. And
Right.
it's actually important to recognize too, like I think of situations, for example, like if you're already in a role and you're going into, say, a meeting, you can think about how others have received kind of what you've said, how have received your presence in the room. And, as you observe kind of how they react to you, or how they react to your just being there, it's really interesting how you can adjust and you can use strategic silence or make, comments a certain way, or use your posture to kind of transform that experience from one of feeling targeted by bias to one where people are actually listening to you. Now, if you're in a situation, for example, where you're not as well known, and I think that this can absolutely be harder, like say you're in a situation where you're going through a job interview, um, this may be something that raises red flags for you during the interview process, and it can help you decide whether or not you actually want to be in a certain environment or not.
That's a really good point, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. And the prepping of yourself beforehand is important, because a lot of the insecurities and thoughts that we have, they're really all in our mind. And having that positive self-talk that we talked about previously, especially before those meetings where you feel like you might be in a situation when people are looking at you and just trying to see, well, what is she going to say? Just basically give yourself a pep talk. That's the best way I can say it. Think of how awesome you are, because you are. There's so many wonderful things you have. And something I tell my clients is that you as a person have your own unique experiences that no one else in the world has. And it's true, because a lot of times there is that comparison that comes up. Oh, well, she did this, she did that, or whatever. But really appreciate your own uniqueness. And the best way to do that is to think highly of yourself.
And now we're back to that first point about building confidence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Confidence is so critically, it's so important. It really, really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this has been a great discussion today, Jacinta. I think we're ready to kind of wrap up. Brought up a lot of really, really interesting things for people to think about building their confidence and improving their communication skills and thinking about how they come across nonverbally. Um, Covered a lot about innate qualities that women have, implicit biases, how women show up versus men, and um, hoping that the audience really got a lot out of this.
Yeah, me too. And I appreciate your candidness about, some of the experiences that you've had and some of the really awesome tips that you shared with us about just in general, what it really means to be a woman in a professional setting, and understanding that there are implicit biases there. Our upbringing has a lot to do with the way that we conduct ourselves. And even though that's not really said a lot publicly, it is actually the reality. And so I appreciate you for just bringing that up and talking about it. And I wanted to know if you wanted to share any final thoughts as it relates to building that unforgettable executive presence for our viewers.
Yeah, I think I would love to leave everyone with the thought that they are truly unique.
Mhm.
Each of us is a unique set of skills, talents, experiences, just everything that's happened in our lives. And there is nobody just like you. And so
Mm.
you can feel confident that every day that you show up, you are showing up as the person you need to be.
Right. Wow, that is such a powerful insight, and I really appreciate that. And I really hope that touches someone, because it is so true. You all are so incredibly unique. And I think as a final thought on my end would be the fact that you are even interested in improving your executive presence says a lot about you as an individual. And this is something that everybody does not do. And so that sets you apart in itself. But the fact that you want to improve it is incredibly important. And there's a lot of resources to help you do that. And just know that the first step is awareness. I know that I want to do better. And so I just appreciate everyone for spending a few moments out of their day with us today to talk about such an incredibly important topic that both of us are very passionate about, to help you on your journey.
Thank you, Jacinta. It was a pleasure talking with you
Awesome.
today.
Likewise. Now, if anybody wants to reach out to you, how can they reach out to you? How can they find you and talk to you?
Oh, it's very easy. They can go to my website at vantageshiftcoaching.com, And you can contact me there by email or phone. There's also a connect page where you can set up a free 20-minute intro chat if you'd like to actually have a chat.
Okay. Awesome. That is fantastic. And if you have any questions on my end, feel free to reach out to me at exciteexcellence.org. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and I'll be happy to chat with you. Also, I have a women's empowerment chat if you just want to talk a little bit about some of your plans and how we can help you move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jacinta.
Thank you
Take
so much,
care.
Suzanne. I appreciate you.
Bye.